You're listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. Hello and welcome to one of the final summer episodes of 2021 from Arcane Carolinas. I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw.
I am your co-host, award-winning novelist, Michael G. Williams, who waited to make sure he was not going to step on your intro.
Nope, I'm done. That's it.
Okay.
Go. Talk to me.
Let's get right into Knobby the Squatch.
Yeah, no prelude, no prologue. Just we're talking about Knobby. Knobby the Squatch.
Okay. Knobby the Squatch is one of those things that you said, hey, this could go into the Sasquatch series. Would you like to handle that episode of it? And I said, sure. Having never heard of Knobby the Squatch before, having no idea what I was signing on for. Mm-hmm. And so I said, sure, I'll look that up. There's got to be a lot out there. If somebody is named that, you know, if there's a Sasquatch that has a name, then there must be a really rich tradition of Knobby the Squatch.
Or at least a direct-to-video movie series.
Right. Definitely. This is like Bargain Bin, Harry and the Hendersons. Right. So
Knobby and the Knoxvilles.
Yes. This story takes place in Cleveland County, North Carolina. What is now Cleveland County, North Carolina, was originally part of the Cherokee Territory in the Carolinas. And in fact, in our most recent Congregate episode, where we talked about Chimney Rock, we talked about Rutherford County and Hickory Nut Gap opening into slightly lower elevations just east of there. Mm-hmm. And that's Cleveland County, basically. Cleveland County is right next door. Because Cleveland County was part of the Cherokee Territory, then the first Europeans to encounter them and go there was the party of Hernando de Soto that arrived in Western North Carolina in 1540. We've talked about them several times.
Hernando de Soto! I want the Telemundo intro for him every time.
Okay. You're going to have to be in charge of that because that is like not going to be my specialty.
Okay.
But so the Cherokee were in what's now Cleveland County when Hernando de Soto arrived in 1540. And they were still there when English and German and French colonizers arrived in what's now Cleveland County in like the mid 1700s. So they had that territory for a very long time.
Just to be clear, the reason I get such a kick out of that is that I feel like it was just like a tour. Like he wasn't... You know what I mean? Like he didn't really stop. He just kind of came in and was just like, Hernando's coming through town. And just like rolled on through. And somehow I like that. Like, I don't know. It just seems like way more fun than, and then he showed up and wrecked everything.
It's funny because in some ways the impact that the Spanish explorers had on the Native American population was a lot less than the impact of English and French and German colonists, because the Spanish explorers, like, they showed up with diseases and all kinds of terrible ideas, but they also like didn't stick around in very many places. They were just like, whoop, no, these people don't like us, we're out of here. You know, and like you look at the story of Jawara that we talked about in the Brown Mountain Lights episode, where the local population like left one guy alive to go tell everybody else, now get out. And and the Spanish listened to that, and that's to their credit.
Conquering here is hard. We should keep it rolling.
They were like, well, they don't seem to have much in the way of gold, and they don't seem to have much interest in listening to what we have to say. So let's just go back to Florida where everything seems nice and safe. It was
Mountain of Youth. Plot twist. It wasn't safe.
Yeah.
What year was that again?
That was 1540.
I'm a big fan of the DeSoto 1540 tour.
Yes.
I got the tour shirt and everything. All the towns on the back.
You take a lot of roadies when you go exploring the New World, is what I'm saying.
Well, you'll lose a lot of
way. You gotta. High turnover, you know.
Yeah. They sign on, though, for the hazard pay. They're like, you know what?
Yeah. Yes. So what is now Cleveland County was formed in 1841 from parts of Lincoln County and Rutherford counties, which are the counties to either side of it. The county seat is Shelby, which has plenty of interesting history in its own right, though I was amused to read that at one point in the 1850s, Shelby was described as, quote, little more than a wide place in the road. And I like that phrasing. That's really cool.
Reminds me of where I live.
Yeah, there you go. You definitely get it. And where I grew up, frankly, is a wide place that's concealed from the road. this story takes place in a different town in Cleveland County, which is the town of Casar, North Carolina. As of the 2017 U.S. Census Bureau Municipal Survey, Casar's estimated population was 293.
Casar sounds like General Zod's like flunky that didn't make the cut to invade Earth.
So originally in 1890, this town was founded as Race Path, as in like a racetrack.
Yeah.
But there was a different race path just across the county line in Rutherford County, as far as I can tell. And so by 1903, they said, well, let's change the name of the town. And they tried to change it to Caesar.
Okay.
Caesar. And when they sent off the paperwork, when the local postmaster like sent off all the paperwork to re-register the town as a different name, it got misspelled in the state records.
No.
The postmaster didn't misspell it. Somebody writing it down and all the official documents needed to be sent back to them misspelled it. And so when the paperwork arrived in 1903, they were told your town is now Casar, North Carolina. And the locals were just like, fine, whatever. It's too much paperwork. We're going to not deal with it. And they took the name.
Casar the Destroyer. Kneel before Casar. Casar, home of the Squatch.
I bet that there's some weird Superman origins of all these other characters whose names we've only heard once kind of story that could be written there.
Sure.
What surprised me is that Knobby the Squatch, or at least the most recent phenomenon associated with Knobby, is so recent. A lot of times when we hear about Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings, they're sort of conveniently distant in the past, where there's like not anybody around to go interview and et cetera. Nobody's expected to have had a cell phone or anything like that.
Right. Like a farmer in 1876 saw a hairy ape-like creature on the edge of one of his fields, that kind of thing.
Totally. But this is one of those phenomena that actually happen a lot and get reported a lot and are sort of under discussed. In the same way that when you run across the New Fork archive or something like that, and you think, wow, people are seeing UFOs a lot more than we talk about. People see Sasquatch and Bigfoot a lot more than we talk about. But anyway, this story begins on June 5th, 2010 at 3 a.m.
I can't remember where I was, but it wasn't Casar.
Yes. Tim Peeler, who lives 5 miles outside of Casar on top of a mountain, does remember where he was. He's very clear that at 3 a.m. on that day, he was sitting in his living room watching the Gospel Channel.
Okay.
That's what he says.
Is he my grandma?
I can't tell if it was a late night or an early morning, but one or the other. It was must-see TV for him. He said that sitting there in his living room watching TV at 3 a.m, he heard coyotes down the hill.
Okay.
That he said sounded like they were attacking something or like fighting over something. So he went outside with his predator collar. Predator collars are, you can like go buy electronic predator collars for people who do predator hunting.
Sure.
And they're like pre-recorded sounds that sound like prey animals in distress or, other predators, mating calls, things like that. And they're meant to attract that sort of animal to your location.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to attract a predator with a mating call because they're going to show up expecting one thing and they get something very different. I imagine they would be pretty pissed.
Yeah, that's, I found it a little stunning that he was like, well, I didn't know what the coyotes down the hill from me were fighting. So I went outside and tried to call them. But that's a very mountain kind of solution to this problem.
Brief aside.
Yeah, go for it.
Very recently, I shared this story with you while not recording. What was it, a month or two ago? It was before the weather got too hot. I was doing some camping.
Yeah.
Got up around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, as one does. Stepped outside my tent, taking in the cool night air when one coyote started howling. And then another coyote somewhere in the distance from a different direction started howling. And then a third one went off and I was like, oh boy, time to get back in the tent. My response was not, you know what I should do? I should try to attract them.
Well, you're not Tim Peeler of Casar, North Carolina.
And I'm not unconvinced by this that he is still not my grandma.
I watched an interview with him where he showed off the predator collar. He's got a homemade predator collar that you have to blow through, and it's attached to like a cut off 2-liter jug. And it was very impressive. I was like, that's actual craftsmanship there.
Hey, come here. Hey, come here.
Who wants a treat? So, shortly after using the predator collar, he says that he saw a Bigfoot emerge from the woods near his house, begin walking towards 2 dogs that he had in kennels in his backyard.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No. Bad Bigfoot.
Yeah. He had these 2 dogs chained up in kennels because they were in heat. and he was concerned that there would be more dogs around later.
Right.
So he was containing them to be responsible, I guess. But anyway, so
we need Bob Barker.
He and Bob Barker could have a great conversation. He sees Bigfoot emerge from the woods and start heading towards those kennels. Peeler says that he moved around to the corner of the house right next to the path that Bigfoot was going to be taking, turned on an exterior light, then picked up a spotlight and turned it on also, and used it to illuminate this creature that he had just seen emerge from the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And according to Peeler, it had the following features: pale skin, a blonde gray beard from his chin down to his waist that he described as a dirty gray, like when the white on a skunk looks a little yellow.
Yeah.
He said it had beautiful hair, and that kept getting quoted as other people discussed his reports later. He described it as having a very human nose. He was very explicit. He said it doesn't have a flat nose like a gorilla. It has a nose like a person's. 6 digits on each hand, a thumb and 5 fingers. He said it had really long fingernails, quote, feet as big as an elephant's, a very human face, other than just the nose, very human face. And he said it smelled kind of like a skunk.
Wow. That's wild. That is a vivid description.
Yes, he's very clear. And he's been consistent about that description for years. That description has never changed or grown or gotten more detailed or anything like that. He has had a description of it that he has given 1,000,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
So he was carrying a walking stick that he says he used to ward off Bigfoot by basically holding it up and poking it at him. And as he put it, rough talking Sasquatch. And
yes, I want to rough talk a Squatch.
He says that he used this to sort of fend off Bigfoot while saying, get out of here.
Right.
And that quote also kept coming up, and he has been asked to basically perform that quote in every interview he's ever done, to the point that he is sick of saying it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, one of the reasons you mentioned that when you see platforms where people are able to safely share an experience, it seems like there's more sightings than we discuss. I think it's part of that. People don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to become the center of a story.
Oh, yeah. And that's a huge part of this.
Yeah.
A huge part of this particular incident. So he said that he was immediately afraid that Bigfoot would somehow hurt his dogs.
Yeah, sure.
He was worried that the dogs had attracted Bigfoot by virtue of being in the heat, and he was worried about what would happen to them. So he wanted to get Bigfoot out of there. Peeler said that Bigfoot turned and walked away once he started like waving the stick at him and poking it at him.
Ugh, fine. You don't have to be a jerk about it. I won't eat your dogs.
Pretty much. And that he went back into the woods through the same opening that he'd used to emerge, and like right back down the same path on the side of this mountain. When it did, he saw its head brush the leaves of an overhanging limb. And so he later measured that, and those leaves were 9 feet from the ground.
Jeez, man, that takes some strong constitution to poke a 9-foot creature with a stick.
Yeah.
He loves those dogs.
And Peeler himself like doesn't seem to be like a huge guy in interviews. He looks like a pretty much average dude. So it's not like he himself is some 7.5 foot tall basketball phenomenon. He is a normal person with a stick. Afterwards, as soon as Bigfoot disappears down the path, Peeler calls 911 and tells them that they have to send somebody to investigate because he's worried that it would come back.
Sure.
And he explicitly told them that he was worried that in order to protect his dogs, he would have to do something to actually hurt Bigfoot. And in a 2014 interview with him that I watched, he said, quote, "It was too humanoid for me to kill. I didn't know if I could do that." And I think that's really important to point out because this also shows a lot of compassion on Peeler's part.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's going to be a story in an upcoming thing where somebody else emphasized the compassion that we have to show when we think about these creatures. And I think that is very important.
Are you referring to the story that will be in the fall issue of the zine?
Yes, I just didn't want to say exactly where it would appear in case you didn't want to talk about that.
Now let's spill those beans. We have a really good listener submitted story out of Haw River, North Carolina from a self-proclaimed skeptic that will be included verbatim as it was submitted to us in the fall edition of the zine. And yes, that person in the heat of the moment was able to use, I mean, I don't want to say common sense because common sense isn't that common, but emotional maturity, I don't know, to navigate the situation in a way that was safe and compassionate.
Yeah, just to be mindful, I think, of the fact that if what we're dealing with is real, then it's also a living thing and should be respected, and we should show compassion to it the same way we would anything.
Yeah, mindfulness. That's a great way of putting it.
Thank you. He said, as soon as he hung up the phone after telling the cops, "Listen, you've got to send somebody because I'm worried about what's going to happen and I do not want to hurt this."
Mm-hmm.
As soon as he hung up, he said his dogs, the ones that were chained up in the yard, started going crazy again. So he hurried back outside, and there he found the Bigfoot had returned while he was in the house and was standing over one of them. But that dog was running in circles around Bigfoot, running back and forth and jumping up and down. And because it was on a chain, he managed to wrap the chain around one of Bigfoot's feet.
Wow. This is like an extended encounter, which is very rare. Very rare.
It's really wild. Said that when Bigfoot realized that this chain had been wrapped around its foot, it stopped paying any attention to the dog, reached down and freed itself from the chain in a very human way, used its hands to hold the chain and pulled its foot out from getting wrapped up. He said that then that gave him time to approach Bigfoot again. And then when Bigfoot stood back up, he used his walking stick to poke him just above the navel. And he showed how high that was. And it's from Peeler's perspective, angling the stick up to poke this creature just above the navel. And again, telling him to leave. And that a second time, Bigfoot turned around and left. Wasn't aggressive, didn't try to hurt him, got the message, turned around and left his yard. Right back into the woods through the same opening in the trees, right back down the hill, gone. Right after that, a sheriff's deputy did show up. And he said that when law enforcement arrived, by coincidence, they parked one of their cars as they pulled into his driveway across that clearing in the trees, that little opening, that gap. And he thinks that that is what probably kept Knobby from coming back a third time, because here's this car sitting across the opening and it's got lights going and everything. Bigfoot was apparently dissuaded from making a third appearance and did not return.
Yeah, that'll do it.
But the thing is, that was not the first time somebody in Cleveland County saw a Sasquatch. And in fact, Cleveland County already had a name for Sasquatch of Knobby, because in the 1970s, there were a bunch of sightings of a Sasquatch around a local mountain named Carpenter's Knob. That was where he was first seen. So people had started calling him Knobby back then, but sightings fell off almost immediately in the 1970s and remained totally unreported until Peeler's account in 2010. But in news reports by Charlotte outlets and in the local newspaper in the week following his reported sighting, a local deputy told journalists that he didn't see anything when he showed up at Peeler's house, but that he had heard plenty of other people tell him his whole life that they had had sightings of Knobby, mostly in the 70s, when this deputy was a kid. To the point that deputy grew up terrified of those stories as a child. And in all the interviews with him that I saw, he doesn't seem particularly skeptical, and he doesn't really seem enthusiastic as a believer either. He's just like, yeah, this is a story I've heard a million times. This is not news.
So this was going on in the 70s, as far back as the 70s, in this county that is the lowland area east of the gap where Chimney Rock is.
Yeah.
I would love to get a map out and like connect dots and see if you could make a Bermuda Triangle of the weird in this region, and then put dates at the pinpoints of where things were reported and try to like triangulate. Okay, well, this is what happened to Chimney Rock on this date. This is what happened in Cherokee on this date. This is what happened, stuff like that.
That would be very interesting. Maybe some listener out there will take that on as a project and we won't have to do it. Peeler made it pretty clear right away that he was on the lookout for more sightings of Knobby, and the town immediately started to draw tourist interest and media interest. But not all media attention is that great.
Right.
Mostly people in the media just made fun of Peeler. There were a lot of stories about this that went out of their way to sort of make fun of his accent, make fun of the things that he said to Bigfoot to get him to leave.
Right.
Jimmy Fallon apparently did a bit where he made fun of Peeler on his show, and the internet was covered in people eager to pile into the comments on news stories and discussion boards and things like that to mock him as this dumb hillbilly.
It's interesting. Jimmy Fallon's reputation is not that great in some circles, with his insincerity and willingness to, I don't know how to say it other than mock people for pretty much no good reason.
Yeah.
I guess we're never going on Fallon. There it is.
Another dream dies.
Yeah.
So in a September 2010 article, so only 3 months later, in Charlotte Magazine, Peeler told a reporter named Sarah Crossland that he was tired of being interviewed, tired of being made fun of. He didn't own a computer, but people had been more than happy to tell him about all the mockery that he was subject to online.
Right.
And he was just pretty much done with talking about it, to the point that you can tell, even in their interview, that he is exhausted by talking about this. His story hasn't changed at all, but he's exhausted by talking about it. And in the meantime, there were people around him who were making pretty decent money off of these Knobby sightings that he had.
Sure.
There was Knobby merch. There was a bus tour that people could take that would basically drive people from town out to near where Peeler lived and then turn around and drive drive them back.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
I say sarcastically.
Right. The two stores in town each had a Knobby t-shirt design and Knobby buttons that they sold in person and online.
Did they each have a different Knobby design?
Yeah.
So it was like a competition as to which one sold better. That's great. I like that. I like that. I like that two different people got to do a unique design. I do like that.
Peeler maintains that he has never made a dime off the story, nor did he really seek to capitalize on it in any way. He says he just wanted to protect his dog, so he called the police and he told them what he saw. And then when people asked him, did you really see that? Then he said yes.
This dude's a good egg. I like this guy.
Yeah. So what blew my mind about this was that as recently as this month, we're recording this in late July of 2021. And as recently as this month, a listener named Richard Church was in Casar asking about Knobby and any subsequent sightings. There have been 0 reported since Peeler's sighting of 11 years ago. But the one remaining store in town of the two is still selling its t-shirts. The clerk told him that those t-shirts probably account for a quarter or more of their total revenue as a business.
Cool.
And there are still things like a Knobby crossing that's featured at a mural in nearby Polksville, and there's a concrete Sasquatch statue at the end of a driveway on the road to Peeler's house. But within months of Peeler's sighting, locals were telling any outsider who asked that if they ever saw Knobby, they would never tell anyone because of the mockery to which everyone knew Peeler had been subjected. And as recently as that trip by our listener, the clerk at that remaining store was still saying that the personal consequences were too great to anybody who might see them, even if Knobby remains one of sort of the tent poles of commerce in the town to this day.
So it's interesting and good that the town came together to protect its own citizens. I like stories like that where people protect their neighbor from mockery. Unrelated to Sasquatch, I mean, unfortunately, folks are always looking for a reason to make fun of somebody else. Like Shelley Duvall, the actress.
Yeah.
I read a recent interview with her. She lives in a town where the reporter, journalist, whatever you want to call them, was doing a piece on Shelley Duvall and stopped in at the local diner before, going to talk to her, trying to find her. And people were straight up like, we're not going to let you talk to her until we know what your motivations are and we get a good feel for who you are, because of how poorly treated she has been in the press.
Yeah.
So this is a problem that goes from the everyman like Peeler in the situation all the way up through famous people. I mean, everybody loves to see a falling star, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of sad.
Yeah. For a lot of people, the only reason to put something or someone on a pedestal is to knock it off. Interestingly, though, in 2019, I believe, when Cleveland County Community College opened a poll on what they should rename their mascot to, Knobby was such an overwhelming winner as a write-in that the school eventually had to accept listing Yeti as one of the official options, and that one won. And now their team is known as the Yetis.
That's great. I love it. I do want to say, I just made the point about people being afraid to share their stories and for fear of mockery or whatever. I think we do a pretty good job of just accepting people's stories as their own.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to make sure that our listeners know that we ask you to share things. And I hope that we've done a good example of, if you're sincere, we have no reason to tear any of these stories down.
I feel like when we look at something that's historical, especially if it's about a real person, a person who was real and really existed, there's sort of an onus on us to do as much objective examination of the historical facts as possible. The books are sort of closed on that person at that point. But when somebody who is alive and around has an experience that they share, then I think the primary responsibility of anybody who hears it is to just respect the fact that they're sharing their experience and not try to dig at them. I feel like we have a responsibility to be both critical thinkers and compassionate listeners.
Right. I'm loving this story, by the way. Sorry for so many tangents. I'm like,
no.
This is just so great. And I love that this story came out. I think it stinks that this person got made fun of. Anyway, keep going. I'm sorry.
No, that's cool. I loved this story also. The more I read, the more I just fell in love with everything about this. So the obvious question is, what do I think? And honestly, I see no particular reason to doubt Peeler's account. I mean, I wasn't there and he doesn't have any photos. And he also doesn't seem to be trying to turn this into any sort of get rich quick scheme. If anything, his home and the people around him have been vandalized and stolen from by people who rolled into town to try to see what the hillbillies saw. And that seems to have harmed the average resident more than it's helped them. Even if there are some people who have figured out really good ways to try to capitalize on this, I feel like on average, people would much rather just be left alone than be the center of attention.
The fact that they came together as a community on this to protect their neighbor, I think says a lot about the authenticity of the experience presented.
And even if somebody in that community decided to never talk about what they might see, not even out of solidarity with him, but just out of like, I don't want what happened to him to happen to me. That's still a sort of social herd immunity, you know? Mm-hmm. Some people have criticized Peeler as being a little too practiced and maybe a little too available when it comes to recreating, like I said, those signature lines and his stance with the stick and things like that. And he has been interviewed at least dozens, probably hundreds of times. Of course, he has a script for telling these stories. He probably has to, just to handle the psychological experience of being so scrutinized repeatedly.
When you get asked the same questions over and over and over and over, you might start with, I'll use made up numbers here, but you might start with like a 3-sentence description, right? Mm-hmm. And then over time, if you are genuinely tired of it and you're not trying to add to it, whittle it down to 2.5 and then 2 and then 1. And you know what I mean? Like you're gonna be consistent over time if you're not trying to make money off of it. Or I am saying that I appreciate the fact that he's consistent.
Yes. And in the meantime, it's also clear that no one much tried to capitalize on those Knobby sightings in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And Peeler has absolutely no relationship that I can find to those sightings or anybody who had them. In fact, I can't even really find anything about whoever had those sightings. I hear people, or I see people in stories about Peeler's sighting reference that there were sightings in the 70s. And in one, somebody implied that there was a documentary film or something that had been made around that time or of that time or about that time, but I can't find any of that stuff. So I don't know. That said, a few years after Peeler's experience, somebody in neighboring Rutherford County did release what looked like a pretty obviously faked Sasquatch video of what they said was Knobby crossing the road. And I read a quote from a rep from BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization, who called it a classic blob squatch.
Blob squatch.
Which I love. And was himself just like, yeah, that's not real. And as recently as 2020, at the height of the pandemic, a then unnamed Fox Network TV show that was trying to put together content to pitch a show, they sent a crew that did interviews and what I'll call recreations around Casar, including hiring a local who owns a Bigfoot suit that's an obviously fake Bigfoot suit, and like hired him to go walk around in the woods while they shot footage of him as part of their recreations of what had happened.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be down for that, man. That's how you get shot during hunting season.
Right. I was amused though that this guy's mom in the article that I read about it was like, oh, I thought that was the funniest thing ever. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. You know, they do things different in Casar.
That reminds me of the Lizard Man, where they had, you know, the original occurrence and lots of reputable sources and stuff. And then like 20 years later, somebody put on that like Godzilla suit. It was just like, there was a sighting. And they did it tongue in cheek, which is why it's okay to sort of laugh at that.
Exactly. And in the county seat of Cleveland County, Shelby, North Carolina in 2019, a woman named Vicki Cook made a lot of headlines nationally and locally by saying that she had trail cam footage of a Bigfoot crossing the road near her home, as well as numerous plaster casts of Bigfoot prints taken from some newly turned and seeded soil in her yard. She said she had prints and casts from 8 different Bigfoots, and that the Sasquatch in her neighborhood liked candy, so she left candy out for them. I don't know if I buy that, because that's sort of a glut of evidence.
That's a lot of Bigfoot.
So I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't really have much of an opinion on it, except that she did seem to very clearly want attention about this. So I don't know.
I'd be curious what kind of candy. Like, are Bigfoots like dogs and they can't eat chocolate?
I bet that whatever it is they can't eat, you need a lot to reach a toxic level.
I'm just saying, we need to be considerate of our cryptid friends.
That's true. That's true. And even if you can't eat it,
no bubble gum.
Is it great to eat nothing but chocolate? Probably not.
Pez. If they really have 6 fingers, they're super dexterous and they can, load a Pez machine really well.
Yeah, but it's so small. They're going to need like the big full-size Pez, like the novelty Pez.
The novelty Pez.
They've got a big dispenser that's like, the size of a fire hydrant. They actually just use a fire hydrant. They just pull it out of the ground, fill it with novelty Pez, crack the top open, take one out. Look at me, I'm eating candy like a human.
And then they all laugh. They're like, silly humans.
Then they're all like, stupid humans. Yeah.
I just realized that this is like the third Pez reference that we've made on this show. Because we did that one interview where I just wasn't talking. Well, Charlie, what do you have to say? I was like, well, I've got some lemon Pez.
A bigger part of the show than we expected.
It is. And honestly, now that so it was, sorry, I will pull myself together here because I just realized what a jerk I am when we get invited to do interviews on other shows. I'm generally just eating candy and listening.
That beats a lot of alternatives, let me tell you. To be frank, it kind of sounds like maybe there are plenty of people around who are happy to take somebody's money if they show up in town asking about Knobby.
Sure.
Yeah. And as Richard himself was told just this month again, Knobby-related business has really dropped off and did so by 2013. And in the absence of much else to drive the local economy, there are going to be people who see a little Knobby action as a harmless way to draw money into a rural community that needs it. But none of that is Peeler's doing. None of that is Peeler's fault either.
No.
And so I think he saw something that night. Do I think he walked up to it and gave it a poke in the abdomen? I don't know the guy. I sure would not.
No.
But maybe he would. And I'll say this from having grown up in the mountains myself. Mountain people will do all manner of things to surprise you. So I'm going to call this an open question, definitely, but one where I'm not really willing to hold Peeler suspect in any way. And I think this is an important opportunity to remember, like you said, a lot of people face derision and even abuse for speaking openly about a lot of these sort of esoteric topics, from religious beliefs and spiritual practices to seeing UFOs, or seeing ghosts, or seeing Bigfoot. My father, as a child, was sent to a local witch woman to have warts cured on his hands. He will be the first one to tell you that what she told him to do worked and that he was not ashamed of that. And my mother was always the first person to make fun of him for saying it.
It's rough. That's rough.
So, a little side note about this, the Patterson-Gimlin link.
Okay.
Patterson-Gimlin released, there's 2 guys, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. They released footage in October of 1967 of what they said was a Bigfoot in the mountains of Northern California.
Right.
The Patterson-Gimlin film is the world's most famous.
It's the one
Bigfoot
everybody
film.
knows.
Yeah. Believe it or not, this area has a link to the original Bigfoot story.
How?
In Greg Long's 2004 book titled The Making of Bigfoot, The Inside Story, a guy in Charlotte named Philip Morris, coincidentally.
Not that Philip Morris.
Not that Philip Morris, but a guy named Philip Morris who founded and owned, and maybe still owns, I don't know, Morris Costumes, claims that he built a costume for Patterson and believes that it was subsequently worn in that world famous footage. Morris Costumes eventually became like the go-to source for extremely lifelike, full-sized, detailed costumes. And Morris's work, when he was running Morris Costumes, was frequently purchased for use as a practical effect in big Hollywood movies. But it started out as Morris's side business when he was working as a traveling stage illusionist. He and his wife would hand sew gorilla costumes in their basement and sell them in catalogs. He said in that 2004 book that Roger Patterson called him in 1967 and said he wanted to buy a gorilla suit, quote, for a gag.
Mm-hmm.
Morris sold him a gorilla suit for $435, which is big money.
Yeah.
In 1966.
It's significant now.
Yeah. I mean, that's not cheap now. And in 1967, that's like $2,500 roughly. Patterson later called Morris again and asked him, how do I make this suit more lifelike? Morris told Greg Long when he was writing this book that he told Patterson, you use sticks to extend the arms, you brush the fur so that it covers the zipper, and you wear football shoulder pads before you put it on to make the shoulders bigger and wider.
Oh.
He said Patterson thanked him and he never heard from him again. But months later, he, along with everybody else who was alive and alert, saw that footage when it got worldwide coverage. And Morris told Greg Long that he never told anybody that he had sold them the suit because he didn't want to expose a fellow magician's technique.
That's awesome.
Quote, in my mind, it was a magic trick.
I love that there's a connection to the Carolinas, to that absolutely classic video that everyone has seen. Whether they realize it or not, you've seen it.
And I'm not saying, like, again, I'm not trying to connect that to Peeler's sighting. I'm not saying
No, totally separate thing. But
I don't think that anybody up in Casar would be so ignorant. I don't think they'd be so ignorant as to put on a gorilla suit and go up into the yard of a guy with multiple dogs, multiple guns, and the skins and hides of animals he has hunted and killed hanging from the side of his house, which he does very prominently. I don't think anybody's going to do that.
Nope. I don't like taking my neighbor that does that their mail when it gets misdelivered.
Yeah. So I don't see that as an explanation here. I don't think anybody was playing a prank on him. I don't think anything like that. I think that he saw something and he has no reason to be necessarily automatically reflexively disbelieved. And that's the story of Knobby the Squatch.
Yay. Thank you. That was excellent.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't know
really
how
enjoyed this.
It's like a feel good one for me because, like, I don't know. It feels really authentic. It's recent. There's living witnesses. We have a field correspondent.
And again, thank you very much to Richard for going out there and asking around and having what seems like a pretty great little adventure and then telling us about it afterwards. Yeah, he sent us a bunch of photos too.
We really appreciate you sharing with us. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Let's see what else is happening. Quick news update. We have our Wax Pack trading cards available on the web store now. Those are new. If you are a Patreon backer, you will get the exclusive card 0, which is in 1 in 5 packs. But as a Patreon member, you continue to get it. We just confirmed a live appearance for September. So September 24th in Durham, North Carolina. We will give more details on that soon. But if you are in or around Durham, September 24th, we will be hanging out. We have the October 6th live stream, which we'll be doing more details on shortly. There will be a little freebie in the zine that we're really excited about that ties into that event. Basically, it's all about to explode. I'm really excited to finally share all the stuff that we've been working on in our off hours with you. Starting Labor Day weekend, we're going to do a virtual appearance for Dragon Con, and then it is going to be off to the races with new content every week, consistently through the end of October into the beginning of November.
I believe that it has been referred to in at least a couple of episodes that we have recorded for it as the Fall Spooky Spectacular.
That sounds like something I would say.
You did.
So we've been recording these for so long and over such an extended period of time that I forget half the stuff that we said or did. But I know I had fun making it.
We've recorded it so far in advance that I am listening to every episode again to make sure that I don't say anything dumb.
And leaving in all the dumb things that I say. You can't just remove me from the episode. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye.
Oh, yeah, I have to stop recording.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards.
I wonder if that made it into the recording. I didn't see that it was recording.